The Longevity Lounge is proudly brought to you by AIA Australia, dedicated to helping Australians live healthier, longer, better lives.
We're pretty excited today because we've got Warrick Bishop back with us, talking about practical prevention, talking about all things heart, and also what people need to be thinking about, what actually matters when it comes to prioritising our heart health.
Carl,
welcome back.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. Absolute pleasure. Look, I'm not sure where to start. There's such a lot to talk about here. As we've spoken before, I think you realise my absolute priority is to start with stopping people having heart attacks, because as we talk about longevity, the objective with longevity is not to die prematurely. So it's all very good and well.
That's the game, right?
Yeah.
That's the ultimate game, is stay on this earth for as long as you can in a good state.
Correct. So all very good taking cold showers and saunas and your fish oil, but if you drop dead going to the shops to buy your supplements, you've sort of missed the boat. And one of the main things that kills us, obviously, is hearts, then next cancer, then diabetes, and then neurodegenerative disease.
Dementias and Alzheimer's.
So we really, if we're going to be looking at doing the finessing, which is what a lot of these biohackers and a lot of this longevity stuff is all about today, you can't do it without respecting the absolute basic science, which is let's make sure we prevent the things we can prevent where we really do have.
So number one in your list of let's stay on this earth for as long as we can is getting screened, getting checked up. And for you, the heart, obviously, being the biggest killer, which you said in the previous podcast is 1 in 4 people go out with a heart issue, then getting that checked is paramount.
Yeah, absolutely, Leach. Yeah. I mean, I'm a cardiologist. I'm at the pointy end of looking after people with heart problems. I can tell you it is so much easier to look after people before they've had an event than during and after an event. It just makes perfect sense.
Now, I want to go back a step here because I know something that others don't know about you, and it's quite ironic, right? That you're a fit, nearly 60-year-old man. I've known you for a long time. You look after yourself. You do everything right. But you've had your own heart issues yourself. So can you explain that one to us?
Yeah, actually, you've caught me out a bit there. There is some truth to that.
There's a lot of good in this, though. So tell the story. Yeah.
And look, to preface this, I have indeed looked after myself. My lipid profile's good, blood pressure's been good, etc., etc. And I've had a heart scan myself, so I knew my heart was good. The last heart scan I had was at around about 50, early 50s, and I was sort of coming up due for a repeat. A couple of Christmases ago, we had Christmas lunch, enjoyed a couple of alcoholic beverages with it. The standard was we'd play Christmas game of soccer in the backyard, and I didn't pull up very well. I was 55, 56. Didn't pull up well. My younger brother said, "Hey, gee whiz, you're not looking so good.
Not playing like you normally do."
Not looking so good. Right. And I felt terrible, actually. I had a bit
of
discomfort in the chest, short of breath. I'm thinking, it's got to be the grog, surely. It's got to be the grog and the food. But then I thought, what would I say to one of my patients who described what appeared to be a reduction in exercise and some symptoms of shortness of breath? I'd say, well, for goodness sake, go and get checked. All settled down. I did contact one of the other cardiologists in Hobart, said, this is what happened, I should probably have a check. Went in and had an ultrasound stress test where they take a picture of your heart.
Yep, done that one.
Exercise you, take another picture of your heart. When they put the probe on to take a picture, the tech who was doing it, their face dropped. I turned around to look at the screen. I had a little bit of experience in the area, and lo and behold, my aorta, my ascending aorta, was markedly dilated.
What's an ascending aorta?
Yep, thought you'd ask. So the heart pumps into the single biggest artery within the body, and that's called the aorta. And as it comes up out of the heart, it's ascending. So the very first part of the aorta, for me, was markedly dilated. Now, for various reasons, I'd never had this identified. And it was at a size very close to 50 millimetres in diameter. Normal's about 35.
Yeah, right.
Now, to put this into context, if you have a problem with your aorta, you get a symptom, and that's often the end. You feel something, because if that bursts or tears inside, it's fatal.
Yeah, right. So when you were playing soccer on Christmas Day, was that actually like a mini heart attack? Did something? What's the description of what happened to you?
Well, look, what happened on Christmas Day is I ate too much and drank too much. I actually completed the stress test without a problem whatsoever. Proved that I had no symptoms at all attributable to my heart. The ascending aorta is simply a pipe that was dilated, still working, but had a weakness. But it hadn't presented with any symptom whatsoever. So it was by complete serendipity, by me deciding what would I advise a patient to do, that I went and got checked, that this was found.
And what do you do when you have? So what's the outcome from an aorta that's not 100%?
Yeah, so as a cardiologist, you become a little bit apprehensive knowing that all the things that can go wrong. But essentially, if the aorta gets too big, it can split. And if it splits, you can imagine, if it splits there, you just die.
Yeah.
The internal lining of these big blood vessels is like Teflon in a fry pan. And if that internal lining comes off, because that internal lining is there to stop the blood sticking, if that internal lining splits or shears, it can peel away. And as it does that, it blocks blood vessels immediately up to the brain and then down to the spine.
Like plaque does, similar, like it's the same outcome.
Probably even worse.
Yeah,
if you think of your Teflon fry pan, if the Teflon peels off, you've got this disaster. And it would peel right around the aorta to all your blood vessels. This is a very bad outlook. If you survive, you've had a major stroke or paralysis, but most people don't even survive. So I then had this...
Sometimes too much knowledge is not good.
Had this very high risk aorta, which scared the pants off me. I contacted one of the best aortic surgeons I knew in Melbourne immediately. He said, "This is the story." He said, "I'm happy to operate on you, Warrick." I tried to calm down for a bit. I had a surgeon also in Hobart. I have to say I'm very blessed because I was connected and in the space.
Yeah.
So I had resource. My surgeon in Hobart was also very supportive, was happy for me to go to anyone, and eventually came back after about 18 months because we decided to track it for a while and see if there was any changes. About 18 months to 2 years later, Ash Hardiker, who was the local surgeon, walked into my office between patients and said, "You're going to have this procedure," which is called a PAERS procedure, stands for Personalised External Aortic Root Support. And basically that's a Dacron sleeve, like a stocking that goes around the outside of the aorta and supports
to make sure that the main skin doesn't peel off.
Yeah, and it holds it in. And so I had this remarkable 3D printed, bespoke sock, if you like, to wrap around my aorta. And Ash Hardiker said, "I've also organised the guy who's going to do it for you. It's a guy called Peter Tesser up in Queensland. He's one of the world leaders. He's got a case series of over 100. And
mate, it's not good. See, when the fit cardiologist goes down with a heart issue, mate, the whole fraternity just bands together to make sure that you're all right.
It was, I mean,
seriously, like you're so fit and healthy.
Absolutely extraordinary journey. I felt so humbled that I had these amazing people. The cardiothoracic surgeon happened to be passing through Hobart several weeks later. I walked out into my consulting room to call the next patient. "Yeah, Carl, come in." And as the patient was getting up, this fellow barrels at me from across the room. Had a mask on, so a bit COVID type, with a hat on. And this guy's coming towards me. And I looked at him and he says, "Peter Tesser." It was the surgeon. Yeah. He said, "You got a moment?" Of course. He sat in my office and said, "I do a bit of this, and I know that one of the biggest things is fear and belief in your surgeon. So here I am to alleviate your fear and let you know I care about it." Unbelievable.
So the message in this is that no one's fallible, right? No one gets a clear run through life. You can do everything right, and still things go wrong. It's just like a car. It's just you can look after your car, or each which way, but. There's bits and pieces that can go wrong. And for you, unfortunately, it was just ironically something to do with the heart, being a cardiologist.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And Leachy, it turned out I've got an older sister who died from an aortic aneurysm. Now, when I'd heard that several years earlier, it was in association with a car accident. I'm thinking, gosh, she must have had a traumatic aneurysm from a car accident. Almost certainly she had the same gene.
So you would be from the highest mountain. Health screening is just your number one pick.
Absolutely.
On longevity.
Absolutely.
So when we start talking about longevity, and this space has now become, the it space at the moment. The Peter Attias, the Andrew Hubermans, Gary Brecker, David Sinclair, and the like have all become, not household names, but they're big names around the world that are celebrities in their own right. And there's a lot of stuff that they talk about which is really interesting.
Yep, absolutely.
Supplements you can take, things you can do. And it seems to me like, and I'd be interested in what you think, that it becomes quite boring health and wellness in that you get your checkups, you try to exercise most days of the week, you eat off the land, you eat whole foods and reduce your alcohol and don't smoke, and that's your pillars. Yeah. And the rest of the stuff is like the 1 and 2%ers. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, look, I think diet, exercise, stress, sleep, these are absolutely critical. And the fifth pillar, I think, if you want to call them pillars, I think the last component is to make sure we really take advantage of where science is. We really have to do that. And the amazing thing is, I believe we could create a society where heart attacks no longer occur by simply using a CT scan to look for calcium within the heart. We could do that. We could do that if we could implement it really well from tomorrow. But we just need the drive and the will to do it. We could reduce death from breast cancer, prostate cancer, bowel cancer, all these things, and Peter Attia talks about the 4 horsemen.
Yeah. So they're that's the low-hanging fruit, isn't it? So in simple terms, they're the things that we should be concentrating
absolutely.
on. Not whether we should be taking a resveratrol or NMN or doing an extra cold shower. We should be worrying about things that make a direct impact straight away.
Yeah, and certainly if you if you've not checked your heart, don't know what your cholesterol is, you're not exercising well, not eating well, then taking all the supplements in the world, there's no evidence that will help. You really need to get the priorities right. So, yeah, screening 1, 2 and 3. Add in the extra bits when you've got the basics in place.
You can do that. You earn the right to do the rest of the stuff if you're doing that bit.
Yeah.
Warrick, after the first podcast we did with you, which was incredibly successful, we've got a lot of questions that came in. So I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions and get your answers. So you've touched on it now around diet, but diet and heart health is big. Supplementation in particular, things like coenzyme Q10 came up in questioning. Love to get your views on that before we get to 2 other big topics, which are going to be saunas and COVID.
Yeah, okay. So all of those...
This is the easy one first.
Yeah, I was going to say all of these are actually challenging topics. And I think it's very hard to be absolutely precise. Diet intervention trials are very complicated for all the reasons surrounding human nature, basically, and outcome and cost and all those things. We do know that there is no question that in a research setting, the Mediterranean diet appears to offer value over and above a low-fat diet. So Mediterranean diet, and I think we get very loose in our use of the term of this. People think, it's a pizza, or it's just fish, or it's
lots
red
of
wine.
Lots of wine.
Yeah, so people get a bit confused. I think a Mediterranean diet really would be best described around fairly limited amounts of red meat, plenty of seafood, white meat, lots of vegetables and fruit, and a dominance of olive oil and possibly nuts. And remember that some of those greens and white meats would be enriched with omega-3 oils through them being of a wild origin rather than commercially fed, for example.
That diet is one that was pushed heavily when the Blue Zone
exactly
sort of story came out, and they found the 9 places around the world, and they found that the Mediterranean diet sort of sat across all those zones pretty much, which helped people live beyond the age of 100.
Yeah, and look, I think so. I think we tip our hat to that. We look at those whole foods. You've alluded to that, but I think what it also misses to a degree is that there's a real cultural component to that. People sit and have their meals together. The way that those societies work is a little bit different as well.
And they were the foods that are in their jurisdiction. That's the local foods that they can get from the land, right, and from the sea, which is why they ate them.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of luck in that maybe as well.
They're unprocessed, and I think there's also there's a significant social component to that, and siestas and various other things that all tie into a greater picture of where that benefit is.
So for your patients, is that something as they walk out the door and they've got some health scares, you're saying, listen, you should be adopting a Mediterranean diet if you don't already do that?
Yeah, so, and there's lots of resources to get some information about that. Heart Foundation, my website, all sorts of places will have information on Mediterranean diet. I think that's super important. There's the portfolio diet, which is good for reducing cholesterol, so that's worth looking at, and really looks at ways of replacing your current foods with alternates such as soy and greens, etc., to reduce cholesterol levels. But diet is also really complicated in the acquisition of protein, because we need protein for muscle strength, and particularly as we age, some of our utilisation of protein and our absorption of amino acids is reduced, so we actually need to increase our protein levels, and things like being vegan or vegetarian versus meat, and if you do have meat, how much should you have? These become more complicated questions. My gut feel is you probably want to mix up the protein that you get. You do need to keep an eye to it. We've talked about that before, Carl. Don't think we pay a lot of attention to the protein we're getting, and you mentioned before as well, Leachy, we lose about 1% of muscle mass per annum after 50 years of age. So how do you battle that? Well,
it's our strongest deterioration is strength, isn't it?
Correct.
Like cardio you can hang on to longer for less work than you can with strength. And for me personally, because I know I'm about 200 pounds, I have about 200 grams of protein a day, and I actually measure that to a degree and know what I'm taking in, only because I just know the importance of holding muscle on the body as we get older. And so I think for people listening out there that are over the age of 50, it's that whole protein piece is an important part to do some research into.
Yeah, I think it's super important. You need to do the physical stimulus to build the muscle and maintain the muscle, but you need the building blocks to build it. There's no question about that.
You need both, yeah. And CoQ10, is that something, and other supplements that they talk about out there that Carl mentioned?
The supplement story is outrageously complex. It's dogged by even more confounders than dietary studies. These nicotinamide mononucleotide, nicotinamide riboside, resveratrol, there is nothing to support those in human outcome data, as far as I'm aware. And
some studies on mice.
And I happen to know that I think there's a group in Melbourne doing some NMN research in cardiac failure, which will be super interesting because you can measure parameters that are not outcome parameters but indices of response.
It's everywhere on Instagram and Facebook ads now. Like everyone's jumped on the bandwagon, haven't they, with these products? And it seems to me like it's just a good way for people to make money.
Look,
I started taking it, to be fair, 6 months ago. I got caught up in it, read some articles, thought, I'll give it a crack, and then went off it because I kept studying it and just thought, no, I don't think there's enough there, and saved myself $100 a month, and we're back to square one again.
Didn't notice a difference, obviously.
Didn't notice anything at all.
Okay.
No, and people, it's funny, because friends of mine still take it, and they're all fit and healthy people, and they swear by the fact that they got more energy later in the day, and they jump out of bed, and I'm just like, really? And they pushed me on it. Like, what have you noticed, Leachy? And I'm like, and I've just straight up, I've noticed nothing other than the fact it's cost me $150 for the couple of tablets. So,
and I think I suspect the supplement story we won't get good answers till we get really good studies, and some of those studies will inform us that certain people will respond and others may not.
Yeah, that might be what it is.
And so the CoQ10 question is really interesting as well. It's CoQ10 is everywhere. It is part of the electron transfer chain within the mitochondria. That's why it's important, because it drives the energy that produces ATP, which is what we burn in the cells. It's literally every cell, so the other name for it is ubiquinone, as you're probably aware. And it makes perfect sense that it should give you more energy. So they've used it and done some studies, and there's probably been some suggestion that within cardiac failure individuals, patients, that they've seen some sort of statistical improvement, which is fantastic. If people do want to supplement with CoQ10, I have no issue with that, but please check all the other stuff that we said about before. No point having bad plaque in your arteries that you don't know about. CoQ10 will not fix it. So do all the other stuff first. But in Australia, there is a CoQ10 Medicare, CoQ10 level Medicare rebate. So if you go to the GP and ask for a CoQ10 level, you can get one. So I recommend people do that. And if it's bulk billed, cost you nothing.
Yeah.
When it does come to supplements, though, I'm happy to take CoQ10, and in fact, I drop in and drop out of it, so I take it as well. I've tried NMN, resveratrol, the whole lot. Don't notice much of a difference. I'm back on fish oil. I think fish oil really is a absolutely gobsmackingly, fantastically confusing and interesting story. But I suspect there is probably a real value in getting good quality DHA and EPA on board. Now, when we look at the studies, there was a trial called the GISI, which is an Italian group prevention study, where they took high-risk individuals and just gave them a gram of fish oil a day, just a tablet. And they reduced sudden cardiac death over, it might be 2 or a 5-year period, can't remember. They reduced the relative risk of sudden cardiac death by over 40%.
That's a huge number.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Now, if that was a pharmaceutical patented product, it would be rammed down everyone's throat. Now, subsequent to that, there's been multiple trials with fish oil, and they've used low doses, but in different cohorts of people. And just like you described with your supplements, Leachy, some of these trials have shown a bit of benefit, some have shown none. And what happens if you take a bunch of people where some will benefit and some won't? You've got this neutralising effect. So there's a confusion there. We had the benefit fairly recently of 2 significant trials in the cardiac space where they took EPA, which is a cosapentoic acid, which is one of the marine triglycerides, not the DHA, cosapentic acid. I always get it confused.
Yeah, that's why they just go with the letters.
DHA, yeah. But they separated out these 2 omega-3 oils. They've just used EPA and they've used it for hearts. There was a trial called the JELIS trial done in Japan, which showed some benefit, and another big trial done recently called REDUCE IT. And they've shown that sort of pharmacological doses of EPA really does reduce cardiac event by about 20%. And that's a drug that's going to come out very soon, brought to Australia by CSL in actual fact. Now, the really interesting thing about that is that the story continues to be confusing in that when you look at DHA, it's critical for brain development and eye development. So if you were going to supplement, you wouldn't just do EPA because you want the whole lot. And when they look at some of the prospective stuff, there's a great trial called, or great observational prospective trial called the Physician's Health Study, where they looked at omega-3 ratios. That test will cost you $100. Highly recommend you get it. $100 omega-3 ratio. And what that does is it looks at your ratios of omega-3 to other fats. In the people with the best omega-3 ratios, they had like a staggering reduction in cardiovascular event rate, like 1/4 or less compared to the people in the lowest quartile. So I think the fish oil story is really important. We talk about hearts, we talk about eyes, and we talk about brain development, but it's also super important for inflammation.
It's amazing. We had Nick Bell, the biohacking sort of name in the country, on here a couple of weeks ago. And he does all the main things right anyway. But so he's looking for those 1%ers. And when Carl asked him what was his routine with supplements, it was 50 to 70 tablets a day, a morning, that he would go through. Now, you know, I would argue that you're taking everything so that you might get benefits across little bits and pieces here and there at a very, very high cost. And he's certainly not short of money, so that didn't matter. But it seems like in this space that for me personally, I use Athletic Greens only because it's a powder form. There's 70 different ingredients in it. Now, the level of ingredients you would argue might not be enough in certain areas for me for what I need, but I feel like I'm covering the bases enough to get some sort of benefit. But that's the sort of the space we're playing in, aren't we? In that until we get really, really personal in what you need yourself, it's very hard to target all the different things that are out there that are going to be beneficial for you.
Yeah, I think I actually see some of these things as temporising measures until the game-changing technology comes along that opens an alternate door. We're talking right here, right now, in a space where we don't even understand what we might see in 5 years' time, because the rate of change in technology in this space is incomprehensible. I'm currently using in my own medical practice, available through the PBS, a molecule that's a messenger RNA, which means it's the protein that binds to our DNA, takes the imprint of DNA, which is really the proteins that we make in our body, takes that imprint, takes it to a factory to print the protein, and we're using that messenger RNA, we're targeting that to alter proteins to manage cholesterol. Now that's 5 or 10 years ago, that was science fiction. And yet now we've got these, if you like, a jab twice a year to maintain cholesterol levels 50% lower by altering the messenger RNA within the cell. Doesn't even alter the DNA. Remarkable.
Wow.
So with that, I can't help but want to ask the big pharma question. So, statins and Lipitor, particularly out of Pfizer, and those big blockbuster drugs, is this in competition to them, or is this their evolution?
Well, at this stage, they're complementary.
Okay.
And interestingly, these sort of drugs are coming out at a price which is cost adjusted for inflation, not dissimilar to where the cost of statins when they came out.
Okay.
20 odd years ago, 15, 20 years ago. So what we'll see, and now statins, you can go and buy them for, peanuts.
Yeah, not much, yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, you'll find many people on them who'll give them to you for nothing because of their intolerances and beliefs. So we will see a time where these technologies will be cheap. We'll just see that. And that there'll be an exponential shift in that technology as well as an exponential shift in cost, just like we've seen in computing, actually, in cost and power. So, so we will literally be able to go and have a twice yearly, if you like, vaccination against heart disease, lowering cholesterol.
Amazing.
But at the moment they're complementary and they're expensive, yeah.
This program is proudly brought to you by Ascend Performance Collagen Protein. Ascend Performance Collagen Protein uses the highest quality ingredients, is dairy-free and tastes great. Each serve contains 25 grams of protein and includes Tenderfort for joint and ligament support, as well as gut matrix to help support a healthy and diverse gut microbiome using a unique combination of pre, pro, and postbiotic ingredients. To find out more or purchase, go to ascendperformance.com.au.
Just two things. There's those questions I mentioned earlier. So there was a big study out of Finland, which was one of the only, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the big study out of Finland, because there's no place where you can study sauna saturation and usage. Better, because they all do it. They all have one in their house.
It's a daily ritual.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it came out with some amazing statistic.
Incredible.
Half your cardiovascular incident.
So 4 days or more a week of sauna for 20 minutes at a high temperature. Doesn't matter whether it's infrared, steam, sauna. But if you elevate your temperature for 20 minutes or more, you decrease the chances of a heart incident by close to 50%.
I think for listeners, they should look into the study, though, because I don't know they did draw the correlation between infrared, because in
I think it was
Finland,
steam. I think you're right. Yeah. But to be fair, but it's all based on the temperature needs to be quite extreme.
Yep.
So we're talking up near that 80 sort of degrees, like heightens, where you literally feel like by the end of 20, 25 minutes you need to get out because you're really being pushed. But that study was just phenomenal. Like I've got an infrared sauna at home and would use it probably close to that a week. It is infrared, not steam. But do you have any Any sort of thoughts on that?
I've got a sauna.
There you go.
So I've got some thoughts on it. I think the data is fascinating. There are unanswered questions like steam versus infrared. I like the idea of infrared because we know if you get the right wavelength, somewhere around 650 nanometers, that wavelength penetrates the skin.
Yeah.
And literally penetrates the cell, enters the mitochondria, and there's a cytochrome P within the electron transfer chain that's activated by that wavelength of light.
It's a great anti-inflammation protocol, would you say?
Yeah, it potentially offers anti-inflammation, but also regeneration. So if you're producing more energy off your electron transfer chain, you've got a cell that's going to function better. So potential for restoration, actually, and rejuvenation. Wow. So I like the idea of infrared, but there's no distinction between steam and infrared.
Yeah, fair call.
That ultimate super high temperature, I'm not sure exactly where that number lands, and people have to be super careful with too high.
Because some people are affected by heat worse than others. Like, for instance, Carl and I can jump into a sauna and handle very high heat, and we do that on a weekly basis with other people. We do hot and cold therapy, and other people have to get out of the sauna because it's just too much for them. So yeah, there's definitely that involved.
So I think we are uncertain about exactly what temperature to target, but I think heating up is really important. And
why do you get such a benefit with the heart? I mean, is it just a chemical relationship where you produce chemicals through the body based on the heat of your body? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so the chemicals you produce, in fact, are called heat shock proteins, and they occur throughout the body. In fact, you can get cold shock proteins as well if you do cold immersion.
Yeah.
Similar story, I have a cold shower, or at least most of the year in Hobart I have a cold shower to finish
We'll
off.
have an ice bath down to you pretty soon, mate.
It's pretty cold in Hobart right at the moment to have a cold shower.
You just jump in the ocean, don't you?
These heat shock or cold shock proteins are facilitators of protein production, so they help with ensuring that protein is properly formed, properly folded, so they are facilitators of best cell function.
What is it telling the body? So if I go and jump in a sauna with Carl, because we're mates, for 25 minutes.
Carl.
Oh, we'll just hold hands in there. And our body produces these chemicals. Is that something like the body having exercise? So what is the body thinking that's happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The body's thinking it's exercising.
So it's like doing an exercise without obviously the cardio benefit.
Yeah.
But from a health point of view, you're getting that benefit from those chemicals being released.
Yeah.
The shock.
And I'm sure it's more than that as well, because as you've talked about before, potential to sit and maybe socialise, relax for half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever the time is. This is wind down time. It may not be purely meditative, but it would break the day. It would be a very important social interaction. Things like relationships. We know the Harvard longevity study.
It's a good study.
Really honed in on a couple of key points for people living long, and it wasn't taking supplements. It was relationships and good health.
Yeah.
And
8 years at it with a good social, like 3 people you could ring up and bare your heart to, and having a good relationship at home with your partner.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when they drilled down on that good relationships and good health, it really turned out that the good relationships drove the good health.
Yeah.
So the relationships are huge. So
if we go with the sauna, right? Because we've just we don't want to drag on here, but with the saunas, we've talked about resveratrol and all these things that aren't proven. I mean, certainly that heat and that sauna piece, with the data that we've got, you would put into those pillars that are very important.
yeah,
I mean, have to be.
Where you could replicate it through exercise, presumably.
Okay.
So I think it's a nice adjunct if needed.
If you're not exercising enough,
Yeah.
then certainly the sauna would tip you back over the scales a bit to help that piece.
And look, it's a really nice thing to do. So if you have the choice and you have the option, you can put it into your lifestyle. Brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've got a sauna booked this afternoon for exactly the same reason. So that, you can relax, connect, relationship, but also do some good with those heat shock
I'd
proteins.
love to know whether you get the same benefit from the infrared heating you up as you do the steam as far as that heat factor goes and the shock proteins.
Yeah, we may not know for a while, but I've gone towards red light because it's just easier, and I really like that red light story, that penetration and activation of the mitochondria, and there is some data that supports that.
So, Warrick, one of the other big questions that came out from, just generally people are talking about this for a variety of reasons, but the COVID vaccine and the implications on the heart, there's a lot of information, misinformation around that. I'd love to get your understanding of, was there the risks that we were alerted to at the time of vaccination, particularly in the first wave, did they warrant the mass vaccination that we've all had and continue to have? And if so, what have the implications been for heart health?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Look, this is obviously a thorny topic, you know that.
Absolutely.
And I think I honestly have to preface it with these were unprecedented times. The last time we saw something like this was the Spanish flu. And none of us remember that, and no one was alive to tell us. Plus, our technologies have changed. This was a situation where the world fell off a cliff. The science was breathtaking. We developed a vaccine in such a short period of time. Not just one, several vaccines. So I think we have to recognise several things. One is completely unprecedented time. Secondly, our ingenuity was remarkable. And thirdly, it's so easy with the retrospectoscope to criticise.
Yeah.
Always is.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I think my heart and soul goes out to our leaders at the time who must have been just riding by the seat of their pants. I take my hat off to the scientists, particularly the Oxford group, because AstraZeneca didn't set out to make a profit, as you're aware. That's my understanding. I think Pfizer and Moderna probably saw a financial opportunity. I think that's a bit disappointing and probably colours the sentiment around that. But when we then looked at the vaccine, it made perfect sense because we weren't travelling, it was knocking people over, it was killing people left, right and centre. The consequence of particularly the cohort getting sick and clogging up hospitals for other conditions was real.
Yeah.
It really was. So
about bed space, wasn't it?
A
Just
50-year-old man, a 60-year-old woman having a heart attack may not have even got to the driveway of the hospital if we didn't shut down that surge of people going there. You would have to say that concept of vaccination was reasonable and fair. To what extent that should have been? Like, should that vaccination age be from above 50, from above 40?
Which was something that I did think about at the time.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we don't need to go and do this for the younger group that aren't going to have a concern unless you've got some sort of medical reason. But then over the age of 55 or something, then that made a lot of sense.
And I think that's exactly where they sort of started. They started with an older
Or do they
age
think
group.
that's just too hard to go and manage?
Yeah. So, no, they do. I think the local landscape was that we looked to vaccinate the older cohort. But they also took some other people like front-line workers in first responders, etc., and then people who were dealing with the public. So the shakeout from a cardiovascular perspective was, as you're probably aware, AstraZeneca vaccine had a idiosyncratic or a completely unexplained complication which led to thrombus within the veins. We couldn't pick who that was going to happen to. It was a bit of a disaster. And certainly if it was given to people who were at low risk of suffering from COVID, then the risk and benefit equation goes against doing it. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were actually RNA vaccines. We touched on RNA before. So these worked in a very different way than we've ever seen vaccines work before they became incorporated into the immune cells of our own bodies. So quite amazing technology. When it came to cardiovascular related issues, we saw mainly problems with some inflammatory responses around the heart muscle and the lining around the heart, heart sac.
Which is where I think Carl and I, coming from a group of friends that are fit and healthy, we all knew someone that ended up going back into hospital with inflammation that were healthy, fit, predominantly males that had a problem.
So when they looked at the data for that, and I saw a number of patients, when they looked at the data for that, it was predominantly men, younger men greater than women affected by this. Generally a very short-lived problem, extremely rarely a longer-term problem. And then when you match that up to the cardiac complications from COVID itself, the risks were lower than getting the virus, right? So invariably the favour was still towards having the vaccine.
Yep.
I think there was an awful lot of, nocebo effect around the process. There were probably many people who reacted in a way that they felt forced to do this, and I think the emotional components generated responses that were surprising.
Also, when you're stuck at home and you're on social media and you're bored and you're going down rabbit holes and listening to people and making a lot of noise on it, it caused a lot of grief for people.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, through my own experience, and I want to say this with compassion, not with judgment, I think it unmasked in the patient cohort I saw, people had true anxiety disorder. And I can remember one patient, young male in particular, who literally sat in my office clutching his chest the whole time he was there. I asked him if he had any pain at the time. No. But he was sitting there literally clutching his chest, and he was almost willing a problem. So I think we unmasked a set of circumstances that could bring people with anxiety or predisposition into the spotlight. Yeah, COVID, very complicated. I've steered clear of the medico-legal opinions in that space because it's almost insoluble, I think. Very difficult.
Do people still need a COVID vaccine at this point?
Yeah, so you'd have to check the ATACA website, which is the Australian vaccine website. I've done my 3, and I'll probably sit with that. I don't think there's a requirement to do more than your 3 at the moment. Okay. I think there's probably still very good reason for people who are at high risk. The older population, comorbidities.
So it's a personal thing, isn't it? Based on your own...
Well, I think the older you get with the more comorbidities, then the more benefit you're likely to get from it.
Or if you're unhealthy and you're younger, and you might be something for you as well.
Yeah. It turned out that people who were much higher BMI carried a much greater risk, for example. Yeah,
okay. For sure. Interesting. That probably brings us to the end of this incredibly interesting podcast. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks, Warrick.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Luigi. Thanks for having me out. Appreciate it. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.